We're back with another episode of the Syncretist Society. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. It's been a couple weeks because it is the transition from spring to summer, and everything is kind of going bananas as it's supposed to. Been busy making a lot of videos for you guys, making a lot of content, playing in the garden, and just enjoying the heat that has arrived in Western North Carolina. Gardens are transitioning over, and everything is moving into full energy and abundance. We're chatting about what to talk about today, and the best way to describe it is we're going to touch on neural weaving and the process and fundamentals, sort of operating procedure of how to correctly, based on who you are, move through this new process of awakening we've been describing.
Yeah. Basically, I wanted to kind of lay the formula out. We've been talking a lot about strategy and authority and mechanics and operating correctly as yourself and all these human design and astrological, genetic, biological functions that we can all kind of look at. But it's really important, as we've talked about, how the mind really needs to be kind of reprogrammed. And this is where we were talking about, okay, let's call it like neural weaving or something like that. We've all heard of, reprogramming your mind and recorrecting your neural pathways and all of that. And I think it's important to share like the foundation of how we get there, because when we've been looking at all of these codes and how all these systems really map out every aspect of human experience, we can see that it's not personal, right? That nothing's personal. It's code, it's genetic. The way that we operate, our specific gates and everything can either be in distortion or it can be in its correct placement. And really what we have here is our perspective, right? We have the perspective that we can choose to look at things in a certain way. And this is not bypassing. I'm not big into the whole spiritual bypassing. I believe in confrontation and not in the way that most people think of that word. I think a lot of times that we need to confront things. It's really based on whatever the situation is presenting. What is the most accurate way, correct way for your frequency, your truth to come out, and if it's even necessary in that moment.
Good point.
So what I want to start with is the first layer, which is nothing is personal. And I know that Alex and I are probably going to chat about this because we might have differing opinions about it and just kind of dive into that. But, when you look at people's charts or how the dynamics are in your relationships, whether it be your parents or with your children, with your partner, your business partners, your friends, what we really want to start doing is seeing everything as non-personal. We've talked about conditioning, how we get conditioned by other people's energy and just by the dynamics, the transits, other beings around us, everything, and how it's important not to condition others as well, right? So we want to just cultivate awareness of dynamics. And in that, we want to catch the mind, right? Because the mind and all its pathways has these programs that when we see a pattern, we see a situation, that it correlates it to something that we've experienced it. And this is how the conditioning really operates. It's like embedded in the mind, which then becomes embedded in the body. And we want to start to catch it in that first moment when that pathway like lights up and we experience something and the mind goes into a frequency that's not correct. It goes into that frequency of distortion, which on the most basic level can be some sort of either victimizing energy. Either we're feeling like we're being victimized, or we're planning I need to control or be dominant or create some sort of strategy to overcome the situation. So if we can catch that in the first part and say, okay, nothing's personal. I like to say, let people do what they do and watch, right? And from there, communicate, again, with your strategy and authority and all of that. But we need to have our communication on this base level of, okay, nothing's personal. So that brings us to that next part, which we'll talk about the nothing's personal.
Let me get stage one. So that is in the habit world called pattern interrupt. So that is neurons that fire together, wire together.
Right.
That old phrase, which is true. So there's different branches of pathways in your brain. And if you start to feel one fire that leads to this, that leads to this, that leads to this. And whenever you're trying to change a habit, it's that first when you feel the itch, something triggered you.
Right.
So the pattern interrupt would be, normally in this situation, I would do this, this, this. The moment you feel that first trigger, you have to do something completely different.
Right.
So interrupt it immediately, because once you start interrupting it, you'll branch off and start encoding, hopefully, a different pathway if you do it enough times.
Right.
So different verbiage, but same exact concept.
Yeah, exactly. And if we don't catch it with the first, like, maybe mental thought, maybe we're going to catch it with a physical feeling, like some system in our body. We might feel heat, and then we associate with an emotion, like, oh, I'm feeling angry, or I'm feeling frustrated, or, resistant, or I'm starting to feel some pain in my body. And then, with psychology, we associate that with, well, I need to do something. I need to, like, defend myself, or I need to come up with some sort of strategy to deal with this. And it's important not to ignore the signals from the body, right?
Oh yeah.
The issue is where we start to create a story, a victim pattern, I'm feeling powerless, I'm not powerful enough, I'm not empowered, or they are doing this to me, or I need to do this to them, whatever it is, and really start to just witness, right? Start to come to this space of witnessing and not even really needing to do anything at that point. Just kind of watching what's going on in your body. Oh, I'm feeling like I have a tension in my chest, or I'm holding my breath, or, I'm noticing how my mind is going down this pathway of self-defeat, or whatever the case is, whatever the story is. And this is that first step. Like, if we can catch it in that moment, say, okay, nothing's personal. They're not doing something to me or trying to victimize me, or whatever the case is. But what can I actually take from this? What can I address maybe in the situation? I believe that the signals in the body, they do indicate, like, okay, maybe our boundaries were overstepped. Right. Maybe our authority, if I said no to something and someone keeps going in on it, it's saying, look, someone's invading on my autonomy or my sovereignty or something like that. So we're not saying that you should just ignore the feelings, or don't have anger, don't have resistance or frustration, or any of these perceived negative emotions, but start to see them in this way to, like, okay, rather than creating a story around the pain in my body and what I'm feeling in my systems, let me just see what's being called forth from me. What do I need to communicate? How can I take a moment to identify what my need is, right? And actually make that an accurate response. We a lot of times have, like, these negative interactions with people because both people, or one person, might not really know what they're feeling.
Exactly. Right.
So they're, like, addressing something, and they're like, and they're angry, or they're sad, or whatever it is.
They're working through it at you.
Yeah. Yep.
Right. And you're just like, I don't think this is us.
Right.
I think you're processing something and it just happens to be directed at me.
Right.
And that usually is in a relationship when you're just like, what are we arguing? Like, we're not actually arguing about anything.
Yeah.
That's usually when there's someone feels not heard, or something happened and they're literally just venting out loud in your general direction.
Yeah.
And you just happen to be there. And there's probably some carryover from something that happened in the past that you'll get to eventually, maybe, but yeah, exactly.
Right. Yeah, and there could be, like, a residual, like, an underlying issue that hasn't been resolved, because a lot of times we don't know exactly what we're feeling. It requires a lot of self-awareness, a lot of emotional intelligence. And so one thing I suggest for people is there's a system called Nonviolent Communication. And what they have on there, if you Google it, there's, like, a needs list and a feelings list. And just having those lists, like, and just looking over them a couple of times. And when you're in that moment and you're feeling some sort of heat in your body, or a system reacting, and you're going to that pathway, and we're having that awareness, you can first look at it and say, okay, well, wait, if nothing's personal, what is my undercurrent that's actually wanting to come forth? Like, okay, I feel the need for support right now, and I'm not feeling supported, right? Or I'm feeling the need for safety, and I don't feel safe, right? So if you can identify your needs and then communicate from that point of, okay, it's not personal. There's no blame, shame, or guilt. That would be the second level. right? It's just our responsibility, each one of us, to properly communicate our truth, right? And part of that is being able to identify what our emotions are, what our feelings are accurately, not from that victim standpoint, but, oh, I actually need this, right?
Yep.
That's what I'm feeling right now. And not even needing to get it from the other person, just communicating like what we're experiencing is liberating.
That's trademark of a mature person, is not needing anything. You don't need validation coming back at
Right.
you. So the one question I do have, well, two, but revenge
Yeah.
and psychos.
Yes.
Like, revenge is intimately personal sometimes, but the way I go to two places whenever I think about that. One is it could have been something traumatic or conditioning from their youth.
Right.
But I have a hard time excusing actions.
Yeah.
If it's with malicious intent. You can usually
Agreed.
get around something if it was by accident or if it was a product of something you know about. But if it's with explicit, like socio or psychopathical malicious intent, that feels very personal.
Yes. Well, and I did a speech in college on how to spot a psychopath, and we know that 1 in 25 people, so 4% of people on the
I
planet,
think it's up. I think it's more now.
sure, it might be,
I think
but
it's like
could
5 or
be
6.
classified as a psychopath. Most psychopaths are not actually dangerous, and in the way that we think of them according to like TV and stuff. But
Lacking empathy.
yes, they lack empathy and inability to, relate to
Right.
other people.
Put yourself in someone else's shoes.
Right. But again, this is not personal, right? So this is why we went through strategy and authority. If someone does not align in your field, right? If you have a friend or a psychopath person in your life, hopefully get them out. But, you have to look at that too. Like, it's not personal, but I need to decide with my authority, like, this person is not correct for me because I cannot be in my authority constantly. I'm not sovereign. My boundaries are constantly being overridden.
Yeah.
And that's why when we talk about strategy and authority, we're being able to identify what's us, what's not us, what's healthy and what's not. And that's an important part of the process. And even in that, right? Like if you have someone who's a narcissist and who's displaying that narcissism, hi Boreas, he wants to join us. That's important, like to know how to communicate to them, to know that, okay, maybe even when I'm communicating my needs and it's not in a personal attacking way towards them, I'm not blaming, shaming, or guilting them, and I can't seem to have any sort of conversation that processes in a way where there's understanding and mutual growth and awareness. Okay, maybe this isn't healthy, right? But it's still not personal because it's still the dynamics of the codes of your specific combination with that person. But it does mean that it is your responsibility. There is still a lot of responsibility and accountability. It's all of our responsibility to communicate what's correct, communicate our truth, not to stuff down, things that we need. These are all, again, conditioned responses to trauma and not being autonomous when we're younger and things like that. But it's our responsibility, if we know someone is not correct, that we need to, okay, I'm not going to need to go into it in a negative way or a nasty situation, but, do what you need to do to make sure that your boundaries, your autonomy, all of that is being honored. And that's part of this too. But then still seeing that as like, all right, it's not personal. If we create that story that's like, oh, they were attacking me and they're doing this and that. And it's not easy to do when people are doing stuff that's like clearly manipulative.
Well, when they're attacking you.
Or stealing or, clearly doing stuff.
Yeah. The problem I have with that, and I completely get what you're saying, especially if you don't want to, fall into the story because of something that happened to you. But I don't know at what point do you... I can see someone who is aware of that being like, that's just the way I am. If they're naturally violent, manipulative, all those things. If they have no intention of working on it, and if they're like, that's just in my codes.
Right.
I wouldn't forgive someone like that from their intentional actions, it feels like a scapegoat. Is what I'm.
Well, I mean, the whole thing is that it's for your own consciousness, your own growth, your own health, right? So we have to be able to resolve situations. Otherwise, it gets more embedded in a conditioned thing where we have to protect ourselves from others. So we lose our power, we lose our sovereignty. And that's not really what this is all about. It's all about being, in your authority and being able to express your truth and knowing how to navigate life correctly. So, hopefully the majority of your relationships are not dealing with narcissists.
Yeah.
But if they are, you're probably allowing it. And there's a lot of conditioning that maybe you're avoiding things, you're avoiding truth, not holding the other person accountable. Or maybe when you try to, they don't, really respond in a good way towards it. But yeah, these would be the foundations of like how to align your psyche in a way so that when you're communicating your outer authority, especially if there's a confrontation, there's something you need to talk about, there's a conflict, there's a difficult thing you need to do, that if you start with this foundation and go into it with that, okay, I'm not going to blame, shame, or guilt myself or the other, that it's not personal, and it's my responsibility to stand in my truth, even if I don't think that they're going to respond how I want them to respond, or well, I can't tell my boss this or that because they won't do anything about it. I can't tell my partner this or that because they're just going to argue with me. They're not going to understand me. They're going to leave me. It's not personal. If they leave you, okay. You being in your truth is what resulted in that. And that's not personal, right? That's just how it is, right? You are in your truth, and that's what should be the most important. And the more that we kind of get into this, every time you have an opportunity to, okay, I'm not going to do what I normally do. I'm not just going to shut down or let that thing happen or ignore it, let them get away with it, whatever. Basically, you're saying I'm not going to communicate my boundaries or stand up for myself in a way that's healthy. If we don't do that, right, and we take that moment and we say, okay, I'm just going to communicate objectively, but truthfully. I can still say, wow, I'm suffering, I'm in pain, without going to victim, right? It's just like, I am feeling pain in my body. I am struggling. I don't know what to say right now. I'm confused about the situation. I think I'm feeling this or that, and I just need to share that with you, right? And you'll be surprised how the correct people in your life will respond to that. And actually like respect you more or understand you more, because we're not in each other's minds.
Right.
We can't be.
Right. That's the biggest thing that most people who are like in any type of relationship halfway through, they'll be like, I just want them to, and it's usually anticipate this or read their mind. You want them to be able to read your mind. You're like, you don't, because that takes the fun out of everything. And that's your only private place. So no, you want that to be entirely yours, but most people are trapped in anticipation or trying to figure out what the other person. Everyone wants to be one step ahead just so they don't get taken advantage of, used, or any of those types of situations.
Right.
Trying to anticipate results.
Yeah, and I find for me that I feel most like safe or protected or in my power when I do confront those situations or I communicate. Like if someone says something to me and I kind of have this feeling like, I don't know if that's really true, or like I feel like they mean something else by that, right? I ask.
Yep.
Or, hey, are you okay? Is that like, do we need to talk about something? Right? Because how many people in our lives do we see are in these unhealthy relationships, maybe our parents or, the way our brothers and sisters talk or our neighbors or whoever it is, where there's like this undercurrent of energy and things being communicated, but no one's being truthful and using their voice to really say, hey, like, let's get to the bottom of this, right? Like, what's really going on? And a lot of times it can be something simple.
It's usually something silly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or something that started silly and then just grew and grew and grew because it was never addressed.
Yeah, exactly. And like for me and my current partner, like when I have an issue or I notice that something's coming up for me, I'm getting emotional, I'm not emotional authority, so I'm feeling that emotional wave or my melancholy or sadness or whatever I'm dealing with. I'll communicate in this way. I'll say, hey, look, I'm having this program running. I'm addressing it. And it's like wanting me to go into like a victim state around this or that. And I think that I need this or that. And it kind of helps me also work through trauma, right? Because when you're doing this, it doesn't mean, oh, all of your trauma, all of your pattern goes away. But we can actually work through it in a healthy way and check ourselves. Like, okay, the blame, shaming, guilting, am I accusing the other person? Well, you need to do this or that, and why did you do this or that? Immediately, the other person's going to go on defense and cannot hear you, like, at all. Doesn't matter if you're right or they're right. It doesn't matter, right? We just have to come into that of like, look, I'm not blaming you. I'm feeling this. This is my own shit, right? This is my own shit that I'm dealing with, and do the best we can. And even when we mess up, we're communicating, and say we let our anger come out and we directed it someone, right? Hopefully we can catch ourselves or apologize and say, look, because we all need to have that framework of it's not personal. We should not be blaming, shaming, or guilting each other. We're here to communicate, and both people probably aren't communicating correctly anyways.
It's so hard. There's so many variables, and everything in the world is fighting against just that one simple premise.
Yeah. And I think really at the end of the day, all of us just want the truth. Just like, what exactly are you feeling?
Just
like,
be blunt.
Yeah, don't hide it from me. Don't try to make me feel better. Like, tell me the truth. Be graceful. And it's where we have grace. Because the tone, and, we look at the gene keys or human design, the 22nd is the gate of grace. And it does have a lot to do with listening and being attentive, but then also how we receive tone, how we put out our tone, and the way that we articulate the 12th gate. And that's a lot to do with either uplifting our spirit or not. And we can do that in situations where we're having a fight or we're having a problem, or there's, someone's having pain because they're being triggered by something. There's an opportunity to actually evolve and grow and both feel better after, even with like the most difficult things that you could talk about. And if the person that you need to talk to about these things is not receptive, or they want to stay in that, like, it's all your fault or screw you kind of attitude, okay. Like, it's still your job to be in your space, be in your objectivity, be in your grace, or maybe even teach, but not in a condescending way, but be the example in the situation. And if that still doesn't work, then you need to minimize the communication or interaction with that person if you can. But this really brings us to what we wanted to talk to about in this podcast. Over the many years of doing sessions and helping people understand who they are through their codes and what they're here to do, what I've learned a lot about is the areas in our charts and who we are, where we receive conditioning, where we receive where these negative patterns could form, and how the mind takes that and forms them. Once we become aware of those things, that is the thing that we're actually able to teach about, right? The distortion becomes the wisdom. It becomes your TED Talk, your course, your whatever, because that's what you're here to see, right? That's what you're receiving, where you're receptive, right? So you're always receiving all different types of combinations of that and situations for that. I used to ask this question to people when I was doing their session. In the beginning, I would say, okay, what's the pattern that you have in relationships? Everyone has like this overarching pattern. And mine used to always be, well, no one really wants to support me. I always end up doing more than other people, blah, blah, blah. I'd have this like story, which was a, self-perpetuating.
Either an energy imbalance or, right. I mean, they keep doing the same thing, hoping to get a different result, hoping that the other person will change the dynamic a little bit when it's usually just you're putting the same initial frequency out there, and you just get variations of the same ripple wave back, or it takes a little longer to come back, but it's usually a mismatched energy. And we normally, like, whatever we create is that story, that pattern, that thought, like, oh,
people don't consider me, or whatever the story is, we are primed to see that then in our life, right? And so that disempowers us, and that creates what we're thinking. And then every drama or dharma, every situation of conflicting energy where we would have an opportunity to rise up, we go into that story of like, oh no, see, they're doing that thing. And it just creates it more and more.
Yeah.
And so you're seeing that for a reason, right? That is something that now you can be an expert on, right? So I can now be an expert on how can people garner more support by being in their truth, or seeing where they're not supporting themselves, right? Because that's what I've experienced for myself. And so each one of us, our distortion, our open centers, our white areas, are not self-mind. The other side of the coin, right? We have truth and distortion. So this other side that is ever present, right? That is the thing that we can look at. Stop avoiding it. Stop trying to use the mind to like, oh, I want to get rid of suffering, so I'm going to do whatever I can to avoid this. It creates more of it. We can take that and just have awareness, right? No blame, shame, or guilt. Actually face the darkness. Go into it. See it for what it is. Start communicating better around it, which helps you process.
Right.
In every situation. Improves your relationships. It, more than anything, though, it heals who you are as like a being, like your spirit, right? And like what you're experiencing as life, right? Doesn't mean you don't have suffering. You're never going to have distortion or fear or, things that you don't like in your life. But now we can take that and use it for what it's for. Like, that's why we have that, right? It's the food for consciousness. It's the food for like awareness, right? What we're here to do. And then we can share that clearly, right? As an outer authority versus I'm just going to share my distortion at a victim level, lower frequency, which is the lack of maturity or the lack of development in consciousness, right? And we all do it. I still do it. I'm definitely not perfect.
Human thing.
Yeah.
It reminds me of any superhero or any archetypal story, which is it's your curse is your gift.
Yeah.
So people usually get pissed because they have something they do or that happens to them, which is kind of the same thing, that is hard to deal with, but that is how you are uniquely positioned, and
right.
It becomes a gift if you are if you fully accept it and then learn how to work with it. So that's every Marvel movie, and that's all X-Men.
The hero's journey.
Right, it's the hero's journey. It's you have something that is a nightmare for you to deal with, but that is almost your superpower.
Right.
And it's probably easier to process and learn how to negotiate with it and things like that if the rest of your patterns maybe are more stable. So if you're not yo-yoing energy levels, if all the other fundamentals are on point, probably it's a little easier to go into that awareness and be able to focus on it and keep accurate track opposed to dealing with all the other chaos in life that not having like stable routines might bring.
Right. It's like hyper distortion.
Right.
And I believe that that's what all the systems that we're working with, it gives the accurate descriptions.
Right.
Because a lot of times, like we said, it's just the clarity. Like, we don't know. It's so distorted. It's
Clears
like
the fog a little bit.
Right. It's like a picture, and it's just like, I can't really see what's going on. And always start from whatever point you're at. So if you're in a point where it's like, I really don't know what's going on with this. I don't know how to fix this. I don't know what's happening in my relationship or my family or whatever it is. You can communicate that, right? Like, I don't know what's going on. I'm feeling confused. I want more clarity, right? A lot of times we think that we can only communicate if we know exactly how we feel or what we need. You're not going to know what you feel and what you need all the time. Right. And you might just need to talk it out in that non-personalized but objective way, but still honoring your feelings. Yes, I'm feeling pain in my body. I'm feeling struggle. I'm feeling suffering. I'm feeling defeated, right? I'm trying to whatever. I'm trying to get myself out of that. I always kind of say as well, like, state your intention when you're communicating, right? So maybe you're dealing with an ex, or you've gone through a divorce, or you have a bad relationship with your mom, or whatever the case is, right?
Frame it.
Yeah. When you're doing this, and I hope you're following your strategy to enter into the conversation, right? So if you're a projector, you need to be recognized that you're
it's
upset.
like, sucks for me.
Yeah.
That's not happening.
Well, same for me. Mine has to come from a response and all of that. But when you're in those situations and you're starting to communicate, you can state the intention. Like, my intention is to hopefully improve our relationship or to get some understanding. I don't want you to feel this way or that way, right? You're stating how you feel too, but we want to address like what we think the other person might be feeling too, and that we care about their emotions and their needs. Because when you're in pain and you're trying to communicate that and there's a difficult situation, it's also hard for the other person, I'm sure, most of the time.
Yeah.
So that's what we all just have to show each other, is that we're safe in our communication, and no one wants to feel all that shame or blame and in that way that's like damning.
Right.
You know, it's like, I'm damned now, and I really was only doing the best I could in that situation. Sure, I could have done things better. There's so many reasons, right? Which is not really always necessary to go into all that, but just being open and honest about our truth, right? And encouraging the other as well. Like, look, I don't want to go into the drama, blame, shame, guilt game. Let's just be objective. Here are the things I'm feeling and needing. Here's what I struggle with in my life. And, you know, thanks for holding space. This is my intention. I bet this is difficult for you too. So, you know, I want to talk to you about that. And there's so much more we could talk to about, you know, the process of having these types of communications. But this is a good start to getting more awareness of even what you're here to share with the world, right? How our personal relationships and all the people we deal with in our life, that's why we have these kind of relationships, is for growth of our consciousness, right? So it might seem like it's an isolated, oh, well, I'm having an argument with my husband about this and that. But really, that is also something that's like a gold nugget that can elevate you to a higher awareness, higher consciousness of truth, right? When I say higher, it's actually just more truthful, right? It's not like your higher self and all this, you know, divisive way that we think of things. It's just, this is more accurate for yourself. Like, if it's a better feeling frequency, because when you speak your truth, wow, you're liberated, you know?
If you think in terms of, I like the term resonance. So people say resonate all the time, and it has a weird connotation, but everything is information. So once I started thinking about things in terms of literal vibration, not like a new age vibration, but literally forms of density, resonance takes on a different perspective. So it's just, if your sciencey in resonance doesn't sit with you, just think like wavelengths.
Right.
And you're just trying literally to match wavelengths. You can think of like a computer monitor or anything that is easy to see flickering. You're trying to match physical wavelengths because you're working in the physical world. And just because you can't see things vibrating doesn't mean they're not.
Exactly.
A lot of engineering type left brain people have a lot of trouble with that. And I did for a while, until you start thinking about like quantum mechanics, just everything you can think about it at that reductionist level.
Well, science proves that.
It breaks down pretty quickly because you can't explain it at the level of depth necessary to bring it back into your real life. There's just a disconnect between the scales. But it's the same thing. Right. It is literally all resonance.
Exactly. And even human design describes that as like our tone or our frequency. And that's exactly what we're talking about. It's true. It really is how you're vibrating, how you're, and a lot of people say the word energy or your being or your truth or whatever these other labels can be, but it is really down to the frequency level. And when people say, oh, raise your frequency, it's just be on the right frequency, be your truth frequency. And how much of yourself can you be in a situation? How comfortable are you in yourself? Like in that situation? And trust me, I'm still not always comfortable myself a lot of times. And when those moments come, because it's that other side of the coin, right? The truth distortion. When you're in distortion, because it's always going to happen, you are aware of it. That's the only thing that we're saying. Just have awareness of it. And then that's where you learn. That becomes the gold. The distortion becomes if you're aware of it and not acting on it in a conditioned way, that becomes a nugget for your consciousness, and then it doesn't affect your frequency in the same way.
Right. And it helps me specifically usually to be in an altered state of consciousness to work through some of that. Like we were saying about the smog or the fog, if there's too many variables and too much shifting for you to even be able to sort through anything, that's why people go on retreats, or if you use any sort of like mild plant medicine like cannabis, it'll calm the noise down to some degree. And then usually if something happens, you can see it takes away some layers of filters, so you don't have to deal with them. So usually I'll just get an epiphany where I'll be working through a situation and I'll be like, oh, like so simple,
right?
But you're putting too many other layers on top of it. And usually it's ascribing too much intent to someone else. You're just like, no, that was just me being dumb. Like it's usually very simple unless you're working with like some of the more complex, like narcissism or psychopathy. That gets layered and complex because it's like too many dynamics, but
it doesn't play by the same rules.
It doesn't play by the same rules. Right.
Not really.
I think malice changes most things. You can no longer give the benefit of the doubt to someone. You can't. Usually I'm just like, this is them being just trying. So I always get with that type of thing, that goes out the window.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and we know that there's predators on the planet. That's why we have all these governments and corruption, and there is definitely anomalies and mutations and different genetic combinations that are, deceptive and not able to have empathy and things like that. But yeah, so that can show up in a lot of different ways. So yeah, for now, just have as much self-awareness as you can have in these situations. If the only thing that you do is say, okay, what if I were to just embody that nothing is personal about this situation? Even though my mind is saying, yeah, but they did this to me and they said this, and why did they do that? Right? What if you can just come to that space of like, okay, that does mean I need to talk about my boundaries and my needs. But them breaking my boundaries and stuff is not even maybe it's not a malicious personal thing. Maybe it's my consciousness giving me an opportunity to establish my sovereignty and my authority, right? And then see how you feel from that. And I get lots of feedback from people about, after I've talked with them about these things, how, wow, I had this conversation at my work, and with my family, I talked to my ex, or I talked to this person or that person, and I was completely shocked how they responded and the level of depth of the conversation we had and all of that. So
yeah, it sends a signal. You're just like, we're not in high school anymore.
Right.
Like, yeah, we need to get to,
yeah.
There's a seriousness where someone's like, oh, we can actually talk about this.
Right.
Okay. Yeah. Most people, most conversations stay at like high school locker room or table level. And I had a blast in high school, but even moving through life, that's one of my phrases. People really never leave high school, myself included. Like the drama and the level of like petty, non-communicative boundaries, all of that usually stays at like a high school lunchroom level.
Yeah.
Until it gets better, and then it's an exponential curve.
Right.
Like how better they get, because communication and listening is so fundamental. Most people never hear you. Actually,
right,
because there's so much connotation put in, so many assumptions put in, like we talked about with our last podcast on communication. There's just layers, and they might not have actually heard you
right
at all.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and like for me too, like if I don't feel clear about someone's communication, I think we can all benefit from this. Like, just clarify. Did you mean that? Is that what you meant by that? Am I sensing an undertone of frustration? Are you frustrated, or are you feeling annoyed? It doesn't hurt to ask, right? And then you check in with yourself too, like, well, maybe I'm, primed from all these traumas of abandonment or whatever the things are. And yeah, just communicating more. And I always thought that I was over communicating, but even still, I realized like, wow, I could have communicated even more, and sometimes people are like, well, I wish you would have just told me that. And I'm like, I told you all this other stuff.
Right.
But wait, why didn't I say, I didn't go the extra, when I think that I'm communicating enough, and I talk a lot, and I communicate a lot, I believe, and I still have to check myself and say, okay, let me get it all out. Let me communicate as much as possible. I was recently visiting my family, and I was talking to my parents, and I was talking to my dad, and he was like, a little bit about this stuff, and he's like, well, do you really think that honesty is always the best? Like, that you should always be honest, like, about everything?
Best is a weird word.
Right. Well, he was trying to say, is it always applicable to, like, every situation? Both my parents are, ex-military and black ops and all that stuff. So I get that there was, like, sometimes you needed to not share everything. But I thought about it for a second. I was like, yeah, like, for me, yes. Because no matter what happens, if me being honest causes this person to leave, withdraw, if I lose that, if that business opportunity goes away or whatever.
It was supposed to.
It was correct.
Right.
Yes.
Which is hard. Yeah, because what people mean is to the biggest benefit of your success in life, usually collecting things is usually what most people are using best for, instead of mental health or the level at which reality will agree with you. Yeah. So if you're creating distortion, that's literally just warping reality around you, and then you don't know what's true anymore if there's too much of that.
Exactly. Right. Exactly. And that's where you don't trust yourself.
What that lying does. Right. That's the biggest thing. If you don't trust yourself, that ruins a lot of things.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Relationship with yourself is always the most fundamental.
Absolutely.
And hardest.
Yeah. Yeah, like I was saying, I get into a lot of situations too where I'm not fully like in myself, and I can feel it, right? I might be out and about, and I'm not real great with like big crowds. Some days I am, and because I'm more introverted, even though I might seem more extroverted at times. I like to have fun and be with people, but certain situations I'm better one-on-one or like in a small group, focusing on something, not just kind of waiting in the soup, waiting for different things to happen. But I'll notice even where myself, I'm not feeling fully in my truth frequency, and I'm feeling warped and distorted and things like that. It happens frequently, and I'll just check in with myself, and I have a different experience with it because I know this stuff, right? Like, okay, this is conditioning, this is just a situation, and I try to almost like remove my mind, like, but like kind of put it like an observer standpoint and like watch the situation. So I kind of use those times as opportunity to learn and grow and just kind of watch dynamics as they happen, and not go into these other negative thought forms of, oh, I'm not good enough or whatever. I have social anxiety. It's not, right? Even after learning my chart, my dynamics, I need to be careful about being in a situation that's more than just one other person. Yeah. Because of how my focus is. It's like OCD at times, like when I'm focusing on something, it's like hyper focus.
Tunnel vision.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's hard for me at times to be in bigger situations with lots of people because there's so much I'm trying to like take in. Yeah. HSP, highly sensitive person. It's just part of how I function, and there's nothing wrong with me, right? It's helped me to accept myself. Yeah, I still work on being more comfortable in that, but I also know the line between what's healthy for me and what's like really taxing my system. So yeah, knowing what layers and levels are coming in that are warping you if there's too much on you, and knowing if that's actually a correct situation. Maybe you just need to change of environment, or you're being conditioned by someone like constantly around you and things like that. But there's a lot more we could talk about with this topic. But
I think something to end on would be, I was listening to another podcast earlier, and one of the hosts mentioned the same thing we were talking about, which is time is changing, quickening. And the benefit of that is instant karma, so to speak. Yeah. So it's people usually can't see or feel their effects, the ripples, because they usually take months to come back. Right. Or a relationship will take a longer time to present something that should have been presented immediately. But now things come back almost immediately. So frustration, bitterness, anger are happening almost in the moment.
Right.
Especially for me, like bitterness will happen in the same day, and I'll be like, oh, okay. So it's good feedback because you don't have to guess what it was and track things and play guessing games. It's at least you can try to correlate things better, and it makes you a little more aware.
Absolutely.
Hopefully. So quicker learning, more painful learning, but quicker learning.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess on another last note here, you just brought up something I wanted to touch on too, is that even Raw talks about our evolution as a species, especially with regards to relationships and things like this, that we're moving towards more aware partnership, right? That's what we should all be striving for or involved with. And this is that instant karma like you're talking about, but seeing how even our compromises or the things that we find difficult, that constant rubbing on your arm that's like making it red, whatever those things are with that person, can be our greatest opportunity for growth and understanding. So we can start to see how those dynamics in partnerships and stuff are valuable, even though it's difficult, right? So, but you have to weigh it out with your authority and your strategy. If you're not able to be in your authority in that relationship, it's probably not healthy.
Yep.
And a lot of times, no amount of therapy is going to change the genetics, right? Because it's our genes. But yeah, hope this was helpful, and thanks for being here, guys, and we will talk to you next week.
One quick housekeeping note. We do have a couple of specific positions that we're looking for help with Syncretist initiation program. That the link's always down there below. If you could join the newsletter, if by chance you have the special skill that we're looking for and you would like to be in the program, we're going to be sending out a newsletter for those talents. So join that if you'd like to become aware and get a pretty large discount on the program for your help.
Yeah.
Until next week, guys.